John was brought out and paraded before the palace gates for everyone to see. His hands were bound with coarse rope that bit into his skin. When his mother was summoned and arrived at the clearing, her heart shattered. She fell to the ground, crying uncontrollably as she saw her only son standing helplessly before a crowd of villagers who mocked him. They whispered, "Thief!" and "Deceiver!" with harsh words that filled the air. They believed he had finally played his ultimate trick on the king's own blood, using his cleverness to betray the royal trust. There lived a boy named John. He was an only child, a fatherless boy left with a mourning mother who had little means to provide for them. John was a cheerful kid. He was known throughout the village as Cunning John. He had a habit of borrowing small things from the marketplace, not out of malice, but out of a desperate need to survive. Yet, John had a secret kindness. He often gave the best of his finds to those hungrier than himself, slipping a stolen fruit into an elder's basket or a copper coin to an orphan. It was his small way of spreading joy in a harsh world. Every evening, when he returned from the marketplace or the stream, he brought his mother a small gift, a bit of dried fish or a handful of grain, claiming he had earned it by helping people fetch water. One sunny afternoon, John was returning from the market with a small scarf when he suddenly bumped into Prince James and his squire on a narrow bush path. Startled, John quickly bowed. "Good afternoon, Your Highness," he greeted smoothly. The prince looked at him with genuine curiosity. John, admiring the prince's fine robe, offered the scarf in his hand. "Please take this, Your Highness," John said softly. "It is a small thing, but it brings luck." The prince blinked in surprise, then smiled warmly. "You are a clever boy," he said. "What is your name?" "John, Your Highness." "I like you, John. You must visit me in the palace sometime." John's eyes widened. "Me? At the palace?" "Yes," the prince laughed. "Come in 3 days. Ask for my squire, Peter. He will bring you to me." John bowed again and hurried home, his heart beating fast. He could barely contain his excitement as he ran into their small hut. "Mama, the prince spoke to me. I am to visit the palace in 3 days." His mother, who was pounding yam, paused. "The prince? Our prince?" "Yes, Mama, he invited me." His mother smiled, but worry hid behind her eyes. "The palace is for the noble, my child, but if he invited you, go with a clean heart and leave your old ways behind." 3 days later, after finishing his chores with unusual speed, John washed his face until it glowed and hurriedly buttoned up his shirt. He began the long walk to the palace, his mind racing with possibilities. When he arrived, the towering stone walls and the guards' sharp spears intimidated him, but he stood tall. He was led through the grand courtyard, past fountains that danced in the sun, to the prince's private quarters. There, Peter, the prince's personal squire, stood waiting with a neutral expression. "You must be John," Peter said, his voice clipped. "The prince has been expecting you." He guided the boy inside. The room was filled with treasures John had only seen in dreams, tapestries of gold and jars of sweet-smelling oils. Prince James's face lit up as soon as he saw his guest. "John!" he exclaimed, rising from a velvet chair. "I am so happy you came. I grew tired of these stone walls today." John bowed deeply. "Thank you, Your Highness." The prince shook his head gently. "When we are in these rooms, call me James. I am not a king yet." They both laughed, though John felt a strange flutter of nerves. The prince then waved to Peter. "Bring out the gifts I prepared for my new friend." Peter returned carrying a bundle of fine linen clothes, a leather belt with a silver buckle, and a pair of sturdy boots. "These are for you," the prince said, placing the items in John's hands. "A boy with your spirit should not walk the village in rags." John's eyes filled with tears. For a boy who had spent his life stealing scraps, this unsolicited kindness was overwhelming. "Thank you, my prince." James smiled and turned to Peter. "Style his hair and find a scent for him. Let's see the noble heart beneath the village dust." Peter nodded and set to work, though his fingers were less than gentle as he combed John's tangled locks. Within an hour, John had transformed into a different person. His skin glowed, and his posture straightened under the weight of the fine fabric. When he finally returned home that evening, his mother gasped, dropping her wooden spoon to the floor. "John, my son?" she asked, stepping back in awe. "You look like a young lord." "The prince said kindness should never go unnoticed, Mama," John replied, spinning around to show off his new boots. His mother smiled, but the familiar shadow remained in her gaze. "Then may kindness always follow you, my child. But remember, the higher a bird flies, the harder it can fall." Neither of them knew that John's past was already being weaponized against his future. Inside the palace, a pair of eyes had watched every gift given, and a heart was hardening with a dangerous, silent rage. John carefully folded his new linen coats and placed them in the old wooden chest near his mat. For the first time in his life, he felt truly seen, not as a nuisance or a thief, but as a person of value. However, his mother remained grounded in her reality. "John," she said softly one evening, "be careful. The prince is generous, but the palace is a maze. You are a village boy, and those who live in gold often look down on those who live in clay." John only laughed, his confidence surging. "Mama, you worry too much. James is my friend." As days turned into weeks, the bond between the two grew stronger. John visited often, entertaining the prince with stories of the marketplace and clever riddles. In return, the prince showered him with gifts, sacks of grain for his mother, fine oils, and even a silver-handled dagger. The king and queen grew fond of the boy as well. They admired his sharp wit and the way his laughter brought life to the quiet halls. But in the shadows of the royal chambers, Peter, the prince's squire, burned with a silent, poisonous jealousy. Before John's arrival, Peter had been the prince's sole confidant. Every discarded garment and every spare coin had been handed to him. Now, he stood by like a ghost, watching a wretched street boy take his place in the prince's heart. Each time John laughed, Peter's blood boiled. To Peter, John was nothing but a common criminal dressed in stolen dignity. "What does he see in this liar?" Peter whispered to himself while polishing the prince's armor. "He thinks he is one of us, but I will remind him of the dirt he came from." The prince's 18th birthday drew near, and the palace became a whirlwind of preparation. Musicians practiced in the courtyards, and the smell of roasting meats filled the air. James insisted that John have a special outfit made for the grand banquet, a deep blue coat embroidered with silver thread. They planned to celebrate together, two friends from different worlds standing as equals. On the morning of the celebration, John prepared a gift of his own, a rare polished riverstone he had spent days smoothing. "Mama, I will be back after the feast," he promised. His mother nodded, though a heavy silence hung over her. "Go well, my son, but remember, the palace is full of glitter, and not all that glitters is gold." John waved her off, his heart full of excitement. He didn't see the tears in her eyes as she whispered a prayer, sensing that the world was about to test her son's new life in the most cruel way imaginable. When John reached the palace, the air was thick with the scent of jasmine and roasting lamb. He greeted the king and queen with a practiced bow and presented his polished riverstone to Prince James. "It is beautiful, John," the prince said, genuinely touched by the simple gift. The royal family smiled, moved by the boy's sincerity. But in the corner of the hall, Peter's heart was a furnace of resentment. To him, the stone was a pebble from a gutter, a mockery of the royal house. He watched as the queen prepared the evening centerpiece, the Star of the East, a heavy gold medallion worn by every heir upon their 18th year. The celebration was a blur of music and dancing. While the guests were distracted by a troop of fire eaters in the courtyard, a shadow slipped into the prince's private dressing room. A hand reached into the velvet-lined box, and the Star of the East disappeared. When the queen later sent Peter to fetch the medallion for the formal presentation, he returned not with the gold, but with a face of calculated horror. "My queen," he gasped, loud enough for the music to falter. "The heirloom, it is gone." Panic erupted. The king stood instantly, his voice thundering over the crowd. "Lock the gates. No one leaves until the Star of the East is returned to the royal house." Guards swarmed the exits, their spears clattering against the stone floor. Every servant, guest, and musician was forced into a line. The search was thorough and ruthless, but the medallion was nowhere to be found. Unknown to the frantic crowd, the thief had already tucked the gold into the deep soil of a large decorative fern near the garden exit. As the queen wept over the loss of her lineage, Peter stepped forward, his eyes cold and sharp as glass. "I saw someone near the chambers," he lied, his voice steady. It was John. He was lingering by the prince's door just before the music began. I saw him tucking something shiny beneath his coat. The prince gasped, stepping back in shock. "Peter, be careful of your words. John is my friend." "I only report what I saw, Your Highness," Peter replied with a false air of tragedy. Perhaps his old habits were too strong to resist. The king's face darkened with a terrible fury. He gestured to the captain of the guard. "Go to the boy's home. If he has fled, bring him back in chains. No mercy for a traitor who bites the hand that feeds him." The guards stormed out of the palace as twilight deepened into a bruised purple. They marched toward the outskirts, their heavy boots kicking up clouds of dust. When they reached the small, leaning hut, they found it empty. A neighbor, cowering behind a wooden fence, pointed toward the village shrine. "They went to offer a prayer of thanks," the man whispered. The guards did not hesitate. They followed the trail until they saw two figures walking slowly through the moonlight, John and his mother. Their voices were low as they hummed a melody of gratitude. Before they could reach the bend in the road, the guards surrounded them, spears leveled at John's chest. "John!" the captain barked. "By order of the king, you are under arrest for the theft of the Star of the East." John froze, his face draining of all color. "I don't understand," he stammered, his hands shaking. "I have stolen nothing." His mother stepped forward, her eyes wide with terror. "My son has changed. He is no thief. Please, look at his heart, not his past." The guards ignored her, grabbing John roughly by the collar. They dragged him away, his new boots scuffing the dirt he had tried so hard to leave behind. "Mama!" John cried out, reaching back, but the guards pushed his mother to the ground. She scrambled up, sobbing and shouting for mercy, but her voice was drowned out by the clank of armor as they hauled him toward the palace dungeon. When they arrived, the courtyard was a sea of judgmental faces. The queen sat on her throne, her eyes red from weeping. "Where is the medallion?" she demanded, her voice like cracking ice. John fell to his knees, the fine blue embroidery of his coat tugging against the stone. "My queen, I swear by my father's soul, I did not take it. I was in the garden watching the stars." But Peter stood nearby, his arms folded. "I saw him," the squire repeated. "He thinks his clever tongue can save him again." The king slammed his fist down. "Lock him in the deep cell until morning." Prince James rushed forward, his voice breaking. "Father, please, give him time to speak." But the king's pride was wounded. "You brought this wolf into our home, James. Now, the village shall see the price of betrayal." As John was dragged into the darkness, his cries echoed through the cold stone halls. The news spread like wildfire. Cunning John had finally stolen the sun itself. By dawn, the story had twisted. claiming John had always planned to rob the royals and flee to the mountains. The day of the final verdict arrived under a sun that felt like a punishing eye. The palace courtyard was packed with villagers, elders, and guards. The king sat upon his high throne, his face a mask of stern justice. John was led out, looking like a ghost of the boy who had once danced through the marketplace. His fine clothes were stained and tattered, his spirit crushed by the weight of the iron shackles. "John," the king intoned, "for the last time, where is the royal medallion?" John knelt in the dust, his voice a mere whisper. "My king, I have nothing to give but my truth. I am innocent." His words were met with a chorus of jeers from the crowd. The king sighed, a sound of heavy finality. "Then you leave me no choice. You shall be executed in 2 market days. Let it be a lesson to all." John's mother let out a scream that seemed to tear the very sky. She collapsed, her forehead hitting the dirt as she begged for her son's life. But the guards dragged John back to the darkness. That night, the mother's heart, already weakened by years of grief and weeks of terror, finally surrendered. She lay on the cold floor of her hut, her breath hitching as she whispered John's name one last time. By morning, she was gone. The prince, shattered by the news, gave a strict order to the jailers. "Do not tell John. He cannot bear this weight and the shadow of the axe at once." He spent his hours weeping in the garden, wandering near the very spot where the truth lay hidden beneath the soil. 2 days before the scheduled execution, the queen joined her son in the garden. She looked at the wilting ferns and frowned. "This place has become as gloomy as a tomb," she said. "Call the gardener to clear these overgrown pots." When the gardener arrived, he began to pull the dead fronds from the large decorative urn near the exit. As he tipped the heavy pot to refresh the soil, something metallic clattered against the stone. The queen and prince froze. There, sparkling in the mud, was the Star of the East. Disbelief washed over them like a cold wave. The queen picked it up, her hands trembling. "The medallion," she whispered. The prince's face went pale with a mixture of relief and horrific realization. "He was innocent," James choked out, "and we have almost destroyed him." They turned toward the palace, fury and guilt burning in their hearts, as they called for Peter to be brought before them in chains. The queen's voice thundered through the halls, demanding Peter's presence. When the squire saw the gold medallion in the prince's hand, his knees buckled. I only wanted him gone," Peter confessed, his voice trembling with a cowardice that turned the prince's stomach. "He took everything that was mine." The queen's eyes were like daggers. "You stole a mother's peace and a boy's life for your pride," she whispered. By her command, Peter was stripped of his title and thrown into the very cell where John had languished. The prince and queen hurried to the dungeon. When they entered the damp cell, John curled into a corner, shielding his eyes from the torchlight. "Please," he croaked, "I am ready." James knelt in the straw, taking John's shackled hands. "Hush, my friend. You are free. The Star of the East has been found." John blinked in confusion as the chains were struck from his wrists. For a long moment he could not breathe, then he collapsed into the prince's arms, sobbing with a relief that shook his entire frame. The next morning, the palace fell into a heavy silence as the king broke the news of his mother's passing. John did not scream. He simply fell to the floor, the world turning gray around him. The royal family, burdened by their own guilt, gave his mother a burial fit for a duchess. The villagers, who had once shouted, "Fief!" stood in ashamed silence as the procession passed. The king issued a decree. John was no longer a village boy, but a ward of the crown, to be raised as a brother to the prince. 2 years passed. John became a man of great wisdom, his cunning now used to help the king rule with mercy. He and James were inseparable, their bond forged in the fire of shared tragedy. But John never forgot the cost of his freedom. Every evening, he placed a fresh flower on his mother's grave, whispering about his day. He had become the heart of the palace, a reminder that the truth is a light that eventually pierces even the deepest shadow. As for Peter, he was eventually released from the cell, but his punishment was a living death. The king decreed that no soul in the kingdom should speak to him, nor should any merchant sell him food or water. He wandered the village like a ghost, a man among men but existing in a vacuum of silence. No one greeted him, no one looked him in the eye. He lived out his days haunted by the memory of his jealousy, proving that while kindness never truly dies, the sting of a lie can echo. John lived a happy life together forever with the prince, the king, and the queen at the palace, and he is now considered a royal blood.